"Do not kneel to me," Emily Carter whispered, but the words were swallowed by the sound of 100 wolves lowering themselves to the stone floor. A moment earlier, the Blood Moon Hall had been laughing at her. A moment earlier, she had been nothing more than the human servant in a stained grey dress, standing too close to a ceremony that was never meant for people like her. Now every wolf in the royal court had dropped to one knee, heads bowed, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on the ground as if some ancient law had reached through their bones and forced them down. Emily stood frozen at the center of the moonlit circle, one hand curled around the empty silver tray against her chest, the other trembling at her side. Red wine soaked the front of her dress where Lady Vanessa Hale had brushed past her too sharply and smiled too sweetly for it to be an accident. The scent of crushed roses, candle smoke, and rain-wet pine pressed around her. Above the glass ceiling, the full moon burned low and crimson, pouring its strange light over the black marble floor, over the silver banners, over the carved wolves watching from the walls like silent judges. Emily could feel every stare without meeting a single eye. She was not supposed to be there. She knew that as surely as she knew the rough feel of the servant's sleeves against her wrists, the quiet ache in her feet after 12 hours of carrying trays, the small shame that came from being reminded every day that kindness was not the same as belonging. Humans did not stand in the royal circle. Humans did not interrupt the blood moon gathering. Humans certainly did not make wolves bow. "What did you do?" Vanessa hissed from somewhere behind her, but even her voice sounded smaller now, thinner, as if fear had slipped beneath the velvet. Emily shook her head once, barely able to breathe. Nothing. It was true. She had done nothing but bend to pick up a fallen goblet, nothing but try to disappear before the nobles could laugh again. But when her fingers touched the center stone, the ancient markings beneath her palm had awakened in pale silver light. The laughter had stopped first. Then the drums. Then the air itself seemed to hold still. One by one, the wolves had turned toward her, not with anger, not with mockery, but with recognition so deep it frightened her more than hatred ever had. At the far end of the hall, the black throne stood beneath a canopy of iron branches. King Adrien Blackwood had not moved since the ceremony began. The Lycan King, ruler of every pack from the northern mountains to the Atlantic coast, watched her with eyes like winter moonlight. Cold. Unblinking. Impossible to read. Then he rose. The entire hall seemed to draw one sharp breath. Emily's heart beat so loudly she thought he must hear it from 70 feet away. His long black coat shifted as he stepped down from the throne, and every bowed wolf lowered their head even further. Emily backed away, but the silver circle glowed brighter beneath her shoes, holding her in place without touching her at all. "Please," she whispered, not knowing who she was begging. "I don't understand." Adrien stopped at the edge of the light. For the first time, his expression changed. Not anger. Not surprise. Something older. Something that looked almost like relief. His voice carried through the silent hall, low and absolute. "No one moves." Emily lifted her eyes to him, and the world narrowed to the space between them. The king looked past the wine on her dress, past the servant's braid coming loose over her shoulder, past every name the court had ever used to make her feel small. Then he stepped into the circle and said the words that made Vanessa go still, the wolves bow deeper, and Emily's breath vanish from her chest. "She is mine." For one breathless second, Emily thought the entire hall had misunderstood him. Mine could mean prisoner. Mine could mean servant. Mine could mean some old royal punishment she had never learned because no one had ever believed a human girl needed to understand wolf law. But King Adrien Blackwood did not look at her like a ruler claiming property. He looked at her like a man who had crossed 1,000 dark miles and finally found the one door that would let him come home. Emily clutched the tray tighter until the rim pressed into her palm. Around her, the wolves remained bowed, their silence heavier than any laughter had ever been. Vanessa Hale stood near the front row in her moon-white gown, her perfect golden hair pinned with silver combs, her face drained of all its practiced sweetness. Only minutes ago, Vanessa had walked through the hall as if the crown had already chosen her. The elders had smiled at her. The noble families had whispered about alliances, bloodlines, and power. Emily had carried wine past them with her eyes lowered, careful not to brush against velvet sleeves or polished boots, because one mistake from a human servant could turn into a week of cold stares and cruel little tasks. She had learned that lesson 3 years earlier, on her first night inside Silverpine Palace. She had been 19 then, soaked from rain, barefoot on a road 5 miles beyond the eastern gate, with no memory of how she had arrived there. A border patrol had found her near the pine trees just after sunrise, wrapped in a torn blanket, shivering so hard she could barely speak her own name. Emily Carter. That was all she had. No family came for her. No missing person notice reached the palace. No human town nearby admitted knowing her. The wolves should have sent her away, but the old housekeeper, Mrs. Bell, had looked at Emily's pale face and frightened gray eyes and said, "The girl needs soup before anyone decides her future." Soup became one night by the kitchen fire. One night became a week. A week became a small room over the laundry, a gray uniform, and a place among the people who cleaned the silver after royal dinners. Emily learned quickly. She learned that wolves could hear a lie in a heartbeat. She learned that they measured worth in strength, scent, rank, and blood. She learned that humans were tolerated when they were useful and forgotten when they were quiet. So she became useful. She rose before dawn. She polished floors until she could see the chandeliers in them. She carried linens through halls longer than football fields and memorized which nobles preferred honey in their tea. She never asked why moonlight made her palms warm. She never asked why the old wolf carving seemed to watch her when she passed. She never asked why Mrs. Bell sometimes looked at the faint crescent-shaped scar on her wrist and went silent. Emily had survived by staying small. But now, under the red moon, with the Lycan King standing 3 feet away and the entire court on its knees, staying small was no longer possible. The trouble had begun before the first ceremonial drum ever sounded. Emily had been in the west corridor with a tray of crystal glasses balanced against her hip, watching the noble families arrive beneath arches wrapped in white roses and silver pine. Coaches lined the courtyard for nearly a quarter mile, their lanterns glowing through the evening mist, their wheels shining as if mud had never existed. Every woman chosen for presentation wore moon-colored silk or deep blue velvet, every man carried himself with the easy confidence of someone born knowing the world would make room for him. Emily moved between them like a shadow with hands. Fill the glasses. Bow her head. Step aside. Do not listen when they laughed. Do not react when someone said, "I thought humans were not allowed near royal blood." She had almost reached the refreshment table when Vanessa Hale turned from a circle of admirers and let her gaze fall on Emily with slow, graceful cruelty. "There you are," Vanessa said, smiling as if they were friends. "I was wondering who they trusted with the cheap work." Emily lowered her eyes. "Mrs. Bell assigned me to the hall tonight, my lady." "Of course she did. You are so good at being invisible." The wolves around Vanessa chuckled softly, careful not to seem too rude before the elders, but pleased enough to enjoy it. Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks. She told herself it did not matter. Words were only wind if she did not open the door to them. Then Vanessa reached for a glass, paused, and tilted it just enough for dark red wine to spill across Emily's gray dress. The liquid spread cold and bright down the front of her uniform. A gasp traveled through the corridor, followed by laughter that felt polished and practiced, like knives made of crystal but used only for decoration. "How clumsy," Vanessa said. Emily stood perfectly still. The tray trembled in her hands, and for a moment she could hear nothing but the fast, frightened beat of her own heart. "I am sorry," she whispered, though she had done nothing wrong. "I will clean it at once." "No," Vanessa said lightly. "You will stay just like that. It might remind everyone what happens when humans stand too close to things above them." Someone behind her murmured, "A human should crawl, not stand among wolves. Emily bent to gather the napkins that had slipped from the tray, because bending was easier than letting them see her eyes. One glass rolled from the silver edge and landed near the base of the ceremonial doors. It did not break, but the sound it made against the stone carried farther than it should have. The doors opened then, releasing a wash of red moonlight from the great hall. Emily saw the ancient circle at the center of the room, saw the black throne at the far end, saw hundreds of candles flickering as if they were holding their breath. Mrs. Bell appeared beside her, small and gray-haired, her face tight with worry. "Go back to the kitchens," she whispered. "This night is turning strange." Emily wanted to obey. She wanted the safety of steam, soup pots, and linen shelves. But the goblet had rolled across the threshold and stopped in the very center of the moon circle. No one else moved to retrieve it. So Emily stepped forward, stained dress and all, while the court watched with amused silence. She crossed the polished black floor one careful step at a time, reached for the fallen glass, and felt the old stone warm beneath her fingertips. That was when the first silver line of light woke under her hand. The silver line did not stop at Emily's hand. It traveled outward in a thin bright thread, slipping through the carved grooves of the moon circle as if the stone had been asleep for centuries and had only been waiting for her touch to remember its purpose. Emily pulled back at once, but the light followed the shape of her fingers for a heartbeat before sinking deeper into the floor. The goblet lay forgotten beside her knee. The laughter in the hall thinned into uneasy silence. Someone whispered an old prayer. Someone else stepped away from the circle so quickly that her pearl necklace snapped and scattered across the black marble like drops of pale rain. Emily rose slowly, her wine-stained dress clinging cold against her legs, her pulse rushing in her ears. She looked to Mrs. Bell near the doorway, hoping for some ordinary explanation, but the old housekeeper's face had gone white. Not angry. Not confused. Afraid. "Emily," Mrs. Bell said softly, and the way she spoke her name made Emily feel as if it belonged to someone else. Then the second marking lit beneath the first, wider and brighter, a crescent within a crown, and every candle around the hall bent its flame toward her. The nobles began to murmur. The elders leaned over their carved staffs. Vanessa's perfect smile disappeared. "That is not possible," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the silence. "She is human." The word should have ended the matter. In Silverpine, human meant ordinary. Human meant fragile. Human meant outside the laws of moon and pack. But the stone did not agree. Its light climbed higher, washing over Emily's shoes, her hem, her trembling hands. It did not burn. It felt warm, almost familiar, like standing near a kitchen fire after coming in from winter rain. Something under her sleeve answered it with a faint glow of its own. Emily stared as the crescent-shaped scar on her wrist brightened beneath the thin fabric. She had spent 3 years hiding that mark because people stared when they noticed it. Mrs. Bell had once told her it was probably from an old childhood injury, and Emily had accepted that because she had needed simple answers. Now the scar shone like moonlight under skin. "Cover it," Vanessa snapped, but no one moved. The first wolf knelt then. He was an older guard near the eastern pillars, broad-shouldered and silver-haired, with medals across his formal coat. His knees touched the floor with a sound so quiet it should not have mattered, yet it rolled through the hall like thunder. Then another wolf knelt. Then another. Not all at once, but one by one, as if each body fought for a moment and lost to something older than pride. Their faces showed shock, shame, reverence, and fear. Emily shook her head, backing toward the edge of the circle. But the markings flared brighter beneath each step. "Please stop," she whispered. "I am no one." At the far end of the hall, the black doors behind the throne opened. A colder wind moved through the chamber, carrying the scent of pine forest, rain, and winter night. The royal guard straightened. The elders lowered their eyes. Even Vanessa forgot to breathe. King Adrien Blackwood entered without hurry, dressed in black, his silver gaze fixed not on the court, not on the candidates, but on the glowing mark at Emily's wrist. King Adrien Blackwood had come to the Blood Moon Hall prepared to disappoint every family that had traveled there. He had not come to choose a mate. He had not come to smile at noble daughters, accept polished vows, or pretend that lineage could solve what destiny had refused to touch. For 7 years, the elders had insisted the crown needed a Luna. For 7 years, Adrien had listened in silence while they brought him women of perfect rank and flawless blood, each one trained to bow, speak gently, and look beautiful beneath moonlight. None of them had reached the sealed place inside him. None of them had stirred the ancient Lycan bond that his people feared and worshipped in equal measure. So he had entered through the rear doors with the intention of ending the ceremony before it became another public disappointment. Then he saw the human girl in the center of the circle. For a moment, the hall around him seemed to fall away. The banners, the candles, the bowed guards, the watchful elders, Vanessa Hale in her white gown, all of it blurred into shadow. Only the girl remained clear. She stood with wine staining her servant dress and fear shining in her gray eyes, one sleeve pulled slightly back from a wrist marked by silver light. She looked too young to carry the silence that surrounded her. Too gentle to be standing in the middle of a court that had never been gentle to anyone. Yet the old stone had awakened for her. Adrien felt it under his feet before he understood it in his mind. The royal sigils beneath the marble were answering her blood, her touch, her presence. The same sigils that had ignored queens, priestesses, and every candidate placed before him since the throne became his. His wolf rose inside him with a force so sudden that Adrien stopped walking. Not rage. Not hunger. Not the restless power that had haunted his sleep for years. Recognition. The word moved through him like light through a locked room. He knew her without knowing her name. Knew the tremor in her hands. Knew the shape of the loneliness she tried to hide. Knew, with a certainty older than language, that the bond had not been absent all these years. It had been waiting for her. "Your Majesty," Elder Marlowe said carefully, stepping forward with both hands folded over his staff. "The circle appears to have responded to an unknown influence. We should remove the girl until we understand the danger." Adrien turned his gaze on him, and the elder stopped as if his voice had failed him. The girl heard the word danger and flinched. That small movement struck Adrien harder than any challenge in court ever had. She expected punishment. She expected blame. Even while standing in a circle that bowed to her, she looked ready to apologize for existing. Vanessa recovered first. Pride returned to her face in sharp, desperate pieces. She spilled wine, stepped where she was forbidden, and triggered some servant trick. Let the guards take her out before she ruins the gathering. A low sound moved through the wolves kneeling nearest the circle, not a growl, not a threat, but an instinctive protest they could not suppress. Emily looked from them to Adrien, her lips parted, her breath uneven. "I did not mean to ruin anything," she said softly. "I was only trying to pick up the glass." Adrien stepped fully into the circle. The silver light climbed around his boots and then bent toward her, binding the space between them in a shining arc. The entire court watched as the last standing wolves dropped to one knee. 100 wolves, nobles and guards alike, bowed before the human girl they had mocked. Adrien stopped close enough to see the tiny cut on her finger where the crystal had nicked her skin, close enough to see that she was trembling and still trying to be brave. His voice, when it came, was quiet enough for her, but carried to every corner of the hall. "You did not ruin the gathering, Emily Carter. You revealed its purpose." Emily stared at him as if his words had opened a door beneath her feet. Revealed its purpose. The phrase made no sense, and yet something inside her answered it with a quiet ache, as if part of her had been waiting to hear that she had a purpose at all. Around the circle, 100 wolves remained on one knee, their heads bowed beneath the red moonlight. Not one of them dared rise. Not the guards in black armor. Not the noble sons with proud shoulders. Not the elders who had spent decades deciding the worth of others by blood and rank. Emily looked at them and felt panic tighten in her chest. These were the same faces that had watched her carry trays, clean spilled tea, and step aside in narrow halls. These were the same people who had called her fragile, temporary, a human mistake kept indoors out of pity. Now their silence pressed against her like a question she could not answer. "Why are they doing this?" she whispered. Her voice shook, but Adrien heard it. Of course he heard it. He seemed to hear more than sound. He seemed to hear the fear beneath it, the disbelief, the years of swallowed apologies. His gaze softened, not enough for the court to notice, but enough for Emily to feel the air change between them. "Because their wolves recognize what their pride refused to see," he said. Vanessa made a sharp sound, half laugh, half protest. "This is impossible. She has no scent. She has no wolf. She is not one of us." Adrien did not turn toward her. His attention stayed on Emily, steady as a lighthouse in a storm. "No," he said. "She is something older than us." The silver markings beneath the floor brightened at his words. Emily pressed her glowing wrist against her stomach, trying to hide it, but the light seeped gently through her fingers. She hated how exposed she felt. Not because of the court, not only because of Vanessa, but because Adrien was looking at the mark as if it was sacred. No one had ever looked at any part of Emily Carter that way. Mrs. Bell stood near the threshold with one hand over her mouth, tears shining in her eyes. Elder Marlowe lowered his head until his white hair nearly touched his carved staff. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "if the moon sigil has awakened, then the old vow has returned." A ripple moved through the bowed wolves, quiet but unmistakable. Moon sigil. Emily knew those words without knowing why. They brushed against the blank places in her memory, the years before the road, before the palace, before she had been found in the rain with nothing but her name and a scar on her wrist. Adrien took one careful step closer, moving slowly, as if approaching a frightened bird. "Emily," he said, and her name in his voice felt less like a command than a promise, "may I see your wrist?" Every instinct told her to hide it. Every memory told her that attention was dangerous. But his hand remained open at his side, asking for nothing by force. So Emily slowly lifted her arm. The sleeve slipped back, revealing the crescent mark glowing silver against her pale skin. The moment the court saw it clearly, every bowed wolf lowered their head to the floor. Emily drew in a stunned breath. Adrien did not bow to the mark. He bowed to her. One knee touched the moonlit stone, and the Lycan King, ruler of every pack in the realm, looked up at the human girl the court had mocked and said, "I have searched for this bond my entire life." For a long moment, no one in the Blood Moon Hall dared breathe too loudly. Emily stood with her wrist held between moonlight and shadow, staring down at the king kneeling before her as if the world had tilted and left her the only person still standing. She had seen Adrien Blackwood from a distance before, passing through the upper corridors with his guards, silent and unreachable, a ruler carved from winter and command. Servants lowered their eyes when he passed. Elders measured every word around him. Strong wolves stepped aside without being asked. Yet now he knelt on the same stone floor where Emily had spent 3 years scrubbing wax and dust from corners no noble ever noticed. Her throat tightened. "Please stand," she whispered. "I do not know how to be looked at like this." Something passed through Adrien's expression then, quiet and deep, like pain. Remembered but not spoken aloud. "Then they will learn slowly," he said. "And so will you." Elder Marlowe lifted his head, his hands trembling around his staff. The moon sigil was believed lost after the last queen disappeared from the western coast 23 years ago. She carried a child of 2 worlds, born of Lycan blood and human mercy, hidden during the collapse of the Old Covenant. Emily's heartbeat stumbled. 23 years. Her age. The number struck her with a strange, hollow ring. Mrs. Bell made a soft sound near the doorway, and Emily turned toward her. The old housekeeper's tears had spilled freely now. "You knew," Emily said, but it came out smaller than an accusation. Mrs. Bell pressed a hand to her chest. "I suspected. I was there the morning they found you near the pines. You had that mark, and the royal blankets, though they were torn and muddy. I begged them to let you stay where no one would look too closely." The blank places in Emily's past seemed to shift, not filling in, but opening. Rain on her face. A woman's voice humming somewhere far away. The smell of salt air. A silver pendant warm against her neck, then gone. She touched the glowing mark on her wrist, and the light pulsed gently, as if answering her grief with patience. Vanessa stepped back, her face pale beneath the candlelight. A servant cannot become queen because of a scar. Adrien rose at last, not quickly, not in anger, but with a steadiness that made the room colder. "No," he said. "A crown does not make her worthy. Her worth was already there when all of you refused to see it." Emily looked at him then, truly looked. Not at the king the court feared, but at the man watching her, as if her confusion mattered, as if her consent mattered, as if destiny itself had no right to rush her faster than her heart could follow. "What happens now?" she asked. Adrien held out his hand, palm open, still not touching her. "Now you choose whether to hear the truth. Not from them. Not from fear. From me." Emily glanced at the wolves still bowed around her, at Mrs. Bell crying softly, at the silver light circling her feet. Then she placed her trembling hand in his. The moment their skin met, the moon sigil bloomed across the floor, and the entire hall filled with a quiet, radiant glow. The glow spread through the blood moon hall like dawn arriving under glass. It moved across the black marble, climbed the silver banners, and turned every tear-shaped candle flame a soft white instead of red. Emily felt Adrien's hand around hers, steady but careful, as if he understood that one wrong motion could send her running back into the shadows she had spent years using as shelter. The bond did not feel like a chain. That surprised her most. It felt like a door standing open, warm light on the other side, waiting for her to decide whether to step through. The wolves around the circle lifted their faces, and for the first time, Emily saw no laughter there. Only awe. Only regret. Some looked at the stained dress they had mocked. Some looked at her trembling hands. Some could not meet her eyes at all. Vanessa stood alone near the front, her white gown shining cold beneath the moonlight. The admiration that had surrounded her all evening had vanished, leaving her beautiful and furious in a silence she could not control. "This is sentiment," she said, voice shaking beneath its polish. "A court cannot kneel because a lost girl glows under old stones. The kingdom needs strength, your majesty. It needs blood that knows how to rule." Emily's fingers tightened before she could stop them. Adrien noticed, but he did not speak over her. He waited. That waiting gave Emily something she had almost forgotten she possessed. A choice. She drew in a slow breath. "I never asked anyone to kneel," she said. Her voice was soft, but the hall had become so still that it carried. "I never asked to be brought here. I never asked to be laughed at, or hidden, or used as proof that humans should know their place." Her throat burned, yet the words kept coming, fragile but true. "All I did was try to survive quietly." Mrs. Bell covered her mouth, crying harder now. Elder Marlowe bowed his head, shame deepening the lines of his face. Vanessa's eyes flashed. "Survival is not leadership." This time Adrien turned toward her. The warmth in the room did not fade, but something in his gaze made every noble straighten. "No," he said. "Compassion is. Endurance is. The ability to carry pain without passing it to someone weaker is." He looked at the kneeling court, his voice calm enough to be more powerful than anger. "For years, you measured worth by the loudest bloodline, the sharpest title, the oldest name. Tonight, the moon chose the one person who had every reason to become bitter and remained kind. Emily looked down, overwhelmed by the gentleness of being defended without being owned by it. Vanessa took one step back, then another, the certainty leaving her face. Adrien faced the elders. No one will force her into a crown. No one will force her into a bond. No one will decide her future while calling it destiny. The word stunned Emily more than the bowing wolves had. She looked at him, and something inside her softened with a quiet, cautious trust. Then what am I supposed to do? She asked. Adrien turned back to her, and in front of the whole court, his voice lowered into something meant only for her heart. Start by believing you were never a mistake. The moon sigil pulsed once beneath their joined hands, bright and clear, and the ancient doors at the far end of the hall opened by themselves, revealing the royal garden beyond, silver with moonlight and waiting like the first page of a life Emily had never dared imagine. Emily did not step into the garden because the doors opened. She stepped forward because, for the first time in 3 years, no one pushed her. The royal garden stretched beyond the hall in quiet silver, bordered by tall pines and winter roses that glowed beneath the moon. A stone path curved toward a fountain carved with 2 wolves facing the same star, and the night air smelled of rain, cedar, and something soft she could not name. Behind her, the court remained silent. The wolves were still kneeling, not because Adrien had ordered them to, but because the truth had settled over the room with more weight than any command. Emily paused at the threshold, her hands still in Adrien's, and looked back at the place where she had been mocked, stained, and made small. The wine on her dress had begun to dry. Her braid had come loose. Her wrist still glowed with a mark she did not understand. Yet the shame that had lived under her skin for years had loosened, thread by thread, as if the moonlight had found it and refused to let it stay hidden. Adrien removed the black cloak from his shoulders and held it out, not dropping it over her as if covering a flaw, but offering it like a choice. Emily looked at the cloak, then at him. I am still afraid, she said. The admission trembled, but it did not break. Adrien's expression remained calm, steady, patient. Then we will begin there. She accepted the cloak and wrapped it around herself. It was warm from his shoulders and far too large, falling past her hands, brushing the stone near her shoes. A murmur moved through the court, not laughter this time, but recognition. Vanessa stood motionless, her face pale, her proud words gone. Mrs. Bell crossed the hall slowly and stopped several feet away, as if unsure whether she was still allowed to come close. Emily saw the fear in the old woman's eyes, not fear of her, but fear of losing the girl she had protected in quiet ways. Emily let go of Adrien's hand and walked to her. For one breath, Mrs. Bell looked ready to bow. Emily caught her hands before she could. Please do not, Emily whispered. You gave me a home when no one else did. Mrs. Bell began to cry, and Emily held her, right there in front of elders, nobles, guards, and the king. No law cracked. No crown dimmed. The world did not end because a future queen embraced a housekeeper. Instead, something gentler than power passed through the hall. Adrien watched them with a stillness that was almost reverence. Then he turned to the court. The blood moon gathering is over. The old covenant has awakened, but Emily Carter will not be rushed, tested, or claimed by fear. She will be honored as the moon sigil bearer, protected as my destined mate, and given the time every soul deserves before stepping into a life that was stolen from her. Elder Marlowe lowered himself deeper. As the moon witnesses, it shall be so. One by one, the wolves repeated the vow. Their voices filled the hall, low and humbled, until the words seemed to rise into the glass ceiling and touch the red moon above. Emily stood beneath that sound, wrapped in the king's cloak, holding Mrs. Bell's hand, feeling Adrien beside her without being trapped by his nearness. She did not know all of her past. She did not know how to become what the sigil said she was. But when Adrien looked at her, she no longer saw a throne waiting to swallow her. She saw a path. Slow, uncertain, moonlit, and finally her own. And when the wolves bowed again, Emily did not shrink. She lifted her chin, tears bright in her eyes, and let the girl who had survived in silence take her first breath as the woman the moon had never forgotten.